The Jedi love to call themselves the guardians of peace and justice, but when you actually sit down and look at the Clone Wars, something starts to feel wrong. Because instead of robed monks quietly meditating in the temple, you've got lightsaber-swinging generals, barking orders at clone troopers, and leading full-scale invasions. That doesn't exactly scream balance in the Force. It screams Saturday morning cartoon version of Patton with laser swords. And here's the part that makes your brain hurt. They never seem to notice the irony. Yoda is out here lecturing about calmness and serenity, while simultaneously launching battalions into Geonosis, like he's auditioning for Saving Private Ryan. Mace Windu, the guy who literally sits at the top of the order, spends half his screen time decapitating droids by the dozen. These guys weren't meditating on peace. They were drafting battle plans like it was their side hustle. It gets even weirder when you think about the clones. An entire army genetically engineered to fight, programmed with obedience chips. And the Jedi just casually accepted that without blinking. Sure, they gave the clones names and treated them better than droids, but let's be real, they were still commanding an enslaved army. That is not peacekeeping, that is military dictatorship with a friendlier smile. And the Jedi Council? Oh man, they've stayed so smug about it. They sat around that chamber like everything was under control, pretending they were above politics, when in reality, Palpatine was leading them around like kids on leashes at a theme park. They kept saying they were serving the Republic, when in truth, they were serving the exact man who was dismantling it piece by piece. It's like watching someone insist they're not addicted to sugar while eating frosting out of the tub. What makes it wild is that they actually thought they were holding the moral high ground. They believed war could somehow bring peace if they were the ones swinging the sabers. Meanwhile, their choices only dragged the galaxy deeper into chaos. And the whole time they clung to this fantasy that they hadn't compromised their ideals. It's almost funny if it wasn't so depressing. In this video, we're going to break down how the Jedi went from spiritual monks to warlords in fancy robes, why they never saw their hypocrisy until it was too late, and how their version of peace ended up destroying them from the inside out. By the end, you'll see that the Clone Wars didn't just ruin the galaxy, it ruined the Jedi themselves. The Jedi always call themselves guardians of peace and justice, but when you look at the Clone Wars, doesn't it feel like something is off? They're not meditating in temples or negotiating treaties. They're literally standing at the front of massive battleships, barking orders like seasoned generals. It makes you wonder, how did a group that preached serenity and detachment end up leading armies across the galaxy? Take Mace Windu, for example. He's supposed to be the calm and collected master of the Order, but in the war he's dropping into battlefields like a superhero, swinging a purple lightsaber through droids by the dozen. Or Yoda, the wise elder who spent centuries teaching patience, suddenly turned into a strategist, moving clone battalions around like pawns on a Holocaust board. That doesn't exactly scream peacekeeper. And what about Obi-Wan Kenobi? He's hailed as the negotiator, the man who uses diplomacy over aggression. Yet during the war, he spends most of his time in armor, leading troops, and coordinating assaults on separatist worlds. His so-called negotiations involve lightsabers clashing and gunships swooping overhead. Was he really negotiating, or was he just winning wars with a friendlier face? Even the symbolism changes. The Jedi always present their lightsabers as elegant weapons for a more civilized age. But when those sabers are being used to cut through legions of droids, they're not symbols of peace, they're just weapons in the hands of commanders. It makes you curious how the Jedi could justify that transformation without ever admitting they were abandoning their core principles. The deeper you dig, the stranger it gets, because the Jedi never even questioned it, at least not openly. They went from monks to military leaders overnight, and treated it as if it were the natural order of things. That contradiction is what makes their story so fascinating, because it shows how easy it is for noble ideals to bend under the weight of war. What drives me crazy about the Jedi during the Clone Wars is how blind they were to their own hypocrisy. They insisted they were fighting for peace, but peace was the last thing happening while they were in charge. They kept preaching about balance and compassion, but in practice they were sanctioning battles that wiped out entire planets. It's frustrating because they never stopped to ask the obvious question. Are we really any different from the Sith if we wage war in the name of peace? Look at the way they used the clones. These weren't volunteers. They were bred in vats for the sole purpose of fighting. And instead of challenging that, the Jedi accepted it without hesitation. They gave them ranks, called them brothers, and then sent them off to die in every campaign. That's not guardians of peace. That's generals exploiting soldiers who had no choice in their fate. The very ideals that were supposed to define them became eroded by years of constant conflict, and it left them hollow. They weren't just fighting battles, they were slowly losing themselves. The clones who trusted them suffered the most. Men like Rex, Cody, Fives, and Echo looked up to the Jedi as leaders, as brothers even. But at the end of the day, the Jedi never freed them from the role they were forced into. They gave them respect, but not freedom, and when Order 66 hit, All that loyalty shattered in an instant. The sorrow comes from knowing the Jedi had years to change that, but never did. Characters like Ahsoka feel that pain too. She believed in the Jedi, she believed in their mission, and yet she walked away after realizing how far they had strayed. Her departure wasn't just a personal choice, it was a statement on how broken the Order had become. That moment carries a weight of sorrow because it shows how even the most faithful could no longer reconcile the Jedi ideal with their actions. And when you look at the Council, you see it in their faces. Yoda, who once represented wisdom, looks defeated and weary. Mace, who embodied authority, becomes rigid and suspicious. Even Obi-Wan, who symbolized compassion, becomes distant and hardened. The war didn't just scar the galaxy, it scarred the Jedi themselves in ways they couldn't repair. The sorrow of their story is that they thought they were saving the galaxy, but in truth, they were dismantling the very foundation of their own order. And by the time they realized it, the damage was already irreversible. And yet, for all their hypocrisy, you can't deny the Jedi were awe-inspiring during the Clone Wars. Their sheer power on the battlefield was unmatched. Watching Yoda lead an assault on Geonosis, or Mace Windu decimate entire droid legions, or Anakin charge into impossible odds, it was breathtaking to see them in action. They may have betrayed their ideals, but visually, they were gods of war. The Clone Wars gave us some of the most spectacular lightsaber battles in Star Wars history, from Obi-Wan and Anakin dueling Dooku, to Ahsoka's fight with Maul on Mandalore, to Kit Fisto taking on General Grievous. Every duel felt larger than life. The Jedi weren't just warriors, they were living legends commanding attention in every scene. As bleak as the Jedi's role in the Clone Wars was, there are glimmers of hope buried in the story. Characters like Ahsoka, who walked away from the Order, proved that it was still possible to learn from the mistakes and carve out a different path. Her independence is a hopeful sign that the ideals of the Jedi can survive even without the institution that failed to uphold them. Luke Skywalker represents another layer of that hope. By the time he emerges, the Jedi are long gone, but he embodies the spirit of what they could have been. He's not a general, he's not a politician, he's simply a Jedi who chooses compassion over conflict. His willingness to throw down his weapon instead of striking Vader shows the hope of what the Jedi were meant to stand for all along. Even Ree's story, divisive as it is, carries the theme of hope. She inherits the legacy of the Jedi, but isn't bound by the baggage of the Clone Wars or the Council. She has the freedom to redefine what being a Jedi means, and that creates space for something better to emerge. That potential for reinvention is where the hope lies. And even within the Clone Wars itself, you see moments of light. Jedi who form genuine bonds with their clones, who try to limit civilian casualties, who still believe in mercy despite the endless battles. Those small sparks remind us that the heart of the Jedi never fully disappeared, even when the Order was at its weakest. The hope is that their story isn't just about failure, but about the possibility of rebuilding. If the Jedi could fall so far, then maybe they can also rise again, but only if they learn from the mistakes that destroyed them. In the end, the Jedi of the Clone Wars weren't the peacekeepers they claimed to be. They were warriors, cloaked in the language of guardianship, generals wielding lightsabers instead of blasters, and soldiers who fought a war they never should have accepted. Their tragedy isn't just that they lost, it's that they never saw their downfall coming until it was already upon them. Order 66 wasn't just the end of the Jedi, it was the inevitable resolution of years of hypocrisy and denial. By becoming leaders of an army they never should have commanded, they walked directly into Sidious's trap. They weren't betrayed out of nowhere, they were outmaneuvered because they had abandoned the very principles that once made them untouchable. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.